Today, I want to explore some ideas on ways to run your IT service provider. Is being a toolsmith the right model for you? Are we entering a post verticalization world? And what does that mean? And what do citizen AI projects mean for your relationships with your customers? Howard Cohen joins me to discuss his thinking about the next generation of IT service providers. Welcome to the Business of Tech Lounge, the live version of the Business of Tech podcast. It's Wednesday, September 25th, 2024, and I'm Dave Sobel. We'll be taking questions and comments throughout the show, so make sure to put them in chat. If you have a question, we'll happily respond to it. I want to thank Sales Builder, our Patreon sponsor, whose support makes this show possible. Focus on your IT sales workflow with the power of automation and visit them at salesbuilder.com. That's BUILDR.com. A reminder, I am watching that chat and will watch for questions. Today, I have Howard Cohen, who's a long-standing writer and speaker in the IT industry. Calling himself a senior resultant, he's served on many vendor advisory panels, including the Apple, Compaq, HP, IBM, and NEC Service Advisory Councils. He's also served on the Ingram Micro Service Network board and as a U.S. board member of the International Association of Microsoft Channel Partners. Howard, welcome to the show.
Hello, Dave. Nice to be in the lounge.
It is nice to hang out with you. We've known one another for a little while, and it'll be fun to riff on a couple of your articles. I want to dive in on the first one here. So let's talk about your article on the emergence of the toolsmith model in the IT industry. So for those listeners, this is where software developers and hardware manufacturers provide tools for partners to create and deliver profitable services rather than simply reselling products. In the article, Howard, you outlined the evolution of software providers and managed services providers in response to the changing market dynamics. And you focus particularly on the shift from product sales to service-oriented models. This approach allows providers to enhance profitability by creating new service offerings around the software tools, ultimately transforming their business relationships with software providers into more collaborative partnerships. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea because it seems at first glance, what you're sort of saying here is look, you want to focus your services around the tools provider themselves. But one of the things recently that I've been a little less keen on is leaning into vendors to build stuff dependent on tools, particularly with my concerns around the flood of private equity money on the software side and the willingness of those vendors to squeeze their partners really hard. The easiest example for me to think about is Broadcom and VMware right now taking as much heat as they can, but that's just an obvious example. So give me a little bit of your thinking here as you think about the toolsmith and how they might navigate that tension.
Okay, I think the best way to illustrate, first of all, I think that looking at it the way you just described, looking at it as being dependent upon the vendor is kind of like saying that a carpenter is dependent upon Stanley tools or Craftsman. They use their tools, but the fact is without the tool, they couldn't do their job. And the same thing is true here. And first of all, let me lean on the title that you enjoyed, senior resultant. I'll focus on the senior part of it. The senior part of it's because I'm very near ancient and been around for a while. In the earliest days, when we needed, we didn't mention, I spent 35 years in the channel running companies that would eventually be called MSPs, but we just called them solution providers way back when.
Sure.
And if we wanted to get something new to sell to customers, we would go to a distributor's catalog, look at the products and say, that looks interesting. Let's pull that in. And that was it. Today, MSPs are challenged to grow their business. And of course, there's only two components to the customer universe, those who are customers and those who are not yet customers. And it's 5 times easier to sell to those who are customers. That's really true. We've all experienced it. So for me to sell more to an existing customer, I need to have new services to offer to them. That's not going to be in a distributor's catalog. And I noticed that some of the software vendors I was working with harkened back to something we used to call the consultant's license. That is software that we bought and we used to do certain things for customers. We didn't sell it to the customer. It was our tool. And we couldn't buy it once and use it universally. That wasn't fair to the software developer, and it was in violation of their license. But we could buy a license for each customer that we used it with. That's becoming the norm in my perspective. I've run into more software developers and hardware manufacturers actually recently that have adopted this model. And I don't know that they ever saw my writing about it. I think it just was a natural evolution for them. The difference is that basically instead of, so let's say you have a tool, let's say you have software that searches all of the traffic logs in your network. Simple enough. Yeah, you can sell that to a customer and they can then take a look through all the traffic logs in their network. Many of them won't know what they're looking at. They have no clue. And some of them who are smaller don't have any staff to do that with. Now, an MSP can say, okay, well, I'm going to buy a license for your software, and I'm going to look at that customer's traffic. And I'm going to make recommendations based on what I see, and I'm going to sell new services to them to remediate whatever it is I find. That to me is the toolsmith model. The software developer is the toolsmith. They're creating tools that the MSPs can use. Many of the MSPs don't even identify the tools to the customer. The customer never knows whose tools they were using. And that is, again, consistent with the carpenter. Do you know whose hammer your carpenter used or whose saw? I mean, it's unusual if that is the case. So I don't see the politics of the vendors feeding strongly into the MSP, unless, of course, the vendor goes poof.
Well, so this is one of those bits where like I instinctually love a lot of what you're talking about here, because as somebody who focuses on the service of what we're doing, and I think that our value as those that think about IT services is to advise customers and give them the best guidance to have business results that come through technology. And I want to buy in, but here's where I'm struggling. So if I think of this like a craftsperson, which I like, and I like this idea, and if I think about your hammer bit, okay, I'm totally on board. But in a craftsman's world, I don't have to subscribe to my hammer and also then only buy nails that only fit a particular type of hammer's fit in order to drive more in. And so if I'm picking on them, by the way, and I'm going to use them because they are like the most extreme version right now. If I think about VMware, right, and I think about if I've been a tools, if I've been a solution provider delivering virtualization here, helping my customers be more dynamic, and then I'd bought into a particular way of doing business, say, buying licenses and deploying them. And then my hammer creator decides, no, in order to use the hammer, now you have to subscribe to that. I've opened myself up to a lot of real risk by kind of relying on my tools in a particular way, where I like to think if I'd been a solution provider that was a little bit further away from the tools, that I might not run into quite as much problem. What's your reaction to that? And like, kind of, what am I getting wrong in my thinking here?
I don't know that you're necessarily getting anything wrong in your thinking. I think maybe you're not thinking out further ahead enough.
Okay.
The way I see it, if I'm using a particular vendor's tool, first of all, I think we need to distinguish between platforms and tools. VMware is a platform, and it makes some sense to me that it's going to require a certain amount of commitment to that platform. But if I think about the tools that I've seen, one of the tools was a tool set. Was a tool set that automated the things you'd ordinarily write in scripts.
Sure.
A lot of people don't know how to write scripts, don't want to know how to write scripts. But this thing, you could just simply tell it what you needed to do, and it would just go do it automatically for you. And there was a host of them. And an MSP who ordinarily just kind of sits in the background monitoring networks and hoping nothing goes wrong, all of a sudden can get proactive and say, we can make these improvements to your network with this, and if you'd like, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. And all of those things were enabled by the tool. If that MSP is selling enough of those services and other MSPs are selling enough of those services, the manufacturer would be a fool to change their model midstream without consulting those people, at least without grandfathering those people. So as you go down the road a piece, the tool will catch on, and it's not like you're subscribing to hammer per se. You're deciding that you're going to use the same hammer all the time. And you can change midstream, even if it's a subscription model. One of the great things about subscriptions is you can end one, start another. That suggests that down the road, there will be competition in specific tools. Right now, my observation is that a lot of the toolsmiths have some pretty novel ideas, terrific, but you know as well as I do, no good idea goes uncopied. So,
Right.
So that I think that's going to be the next stage for that. But I've just run into a network security provider, and to me, I mean, you buy firewalls from them, but their messaging is completely different now. Their messaging is, you can offer this service, this service, this service, and oh, by the way, all those services are delivered by our SOC. So you don't have to build a SOC. You can simply use ours to do that. And now those MSPs have a choice. They can use the SOC for those service sales, which are subscription, or they can sell the hardware and the software and install it on site, or a combination of the two, depending upon the appropriate architecture. So to me, I thought that was dynamite. I thought they had captured the best of both worlds. And I see more of it. I see that starting to become more and more. I mean, I think more and more of our manufacturers and software developers are realizing that there are more and more smaller companies, and the bulk of the market is down there. Hard to justify hiring staff, easier to justify virtual staff using an MSP.
Well, I mean, I buy in, and I think there's a subtlety to what you just described that I want to bang on a little bit, because I think it's important for us to think about the difference between products and tools versus platforms in this context. And I'd really like to get your take on the key characteristics of the two, because it feels like you're making a lot of really important decisions when you're investing in a platform versus some versatility that you may get over on the tool side.
Right. Well, that is, if you talk to anybody who's manufacturing platforms, they will tell you that tools are a bad idea. You're going to end up with tool sprawl. I love that phrase, tool sprawl. You'll have too many tools. And when somebody leaves, they're the only one who knows how to use that tool.
Right.
You'll have to abandon that tool. Tools are bad tools. Platform to them is the assembly of all those different tools into one consistent interface and one contiguous platform where they can all interact with each other, share data with each other, and make life easier for the person using them all. And I agree, there's tremendous value if you can find a platform that does the things you need to do, or at least most of them. Yeah, invest in that platform, because and the vendor is a reliable vendor. Invest in that platform because it's got all the tools and they do work well together. On the other hand, if if you want to become more of a proactive MSP, and I guess that's the distinction we haven't talked about here, but to me, I see most MSPs as being highly reactive. They're monitoring and they're detecting, and when they detect, they identify, they evaluate, and they remediate. Terrific. MDR is everything. A lot more MSPs these days want their customers to see them more often. They want to be in their customer's face a little more often, so that at renewal time it's not such a burden. And so they want to do things that are proactive, that help improve the environment. And I think that that's where tool makers, toolsmiths, can really shine by providing tools that allow them to do things they hadn't been doing previously, or they were creating themselves and they were somewhat prehistoric in a lot of cases. It just, I think that that's where tools fit really, really well. So you're right. There is a certain level of subtlety to it in terms of how the MSP relates to their customer, but I think it expands the relationship with the customer. I think it makes it deeper, where I'm not just waiting for things to go wrong. I'm making sure things don't. And that's the difference I see between platforms and tools.
Okay, so I'll buy, and I don't disagree with you there at all. And I think their answer might be in the next bit. A reminder for those that are watching: Howard and I are happy to take questions and your comments. Throw them in chat. We'll definitely respond to them. So Howard, I think it's important as we're thinking about then the value that providers are doing on. I have to talk about the transition to a post verticalization era for technology service providers that you wrote about recently. You sort of emphasized the need for specialization, but you also leaned heavily into collaboration among professionals. And you walked through the evolution from a generalist IT service provider or managed services provider to the idea of a business technologist. And you really advocate for a shift in mindset and practices to enhance that professionalism in client service.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about what you envision a post-verticalization MSP looking like.
Okay, so I've been very careful up until now to not plug any particular manufacturer, including the Toolsmiths that I've been working with. But I will do a shameless plug for the National Society of IT Service Providers. I've gotten involved with the organization primarily because they share my dream of establishing professional stature for the people who work in our business, just like those who work in the legal profession, the architectural profession, the accounting profession, the medical profession. I see the information technology profession. And as I look at that and I think about that, the recent CrowdStrike thing is what I talk about in the article, which is in the evolving MSP. And so that's what I really talk about all the time, is how MSPs are evolving or how they can evolve. And basically, if I'm a doctor, okay, let's say I'm a primary care physician, something I'm very familiar with these days.
Sure.
And as I age, I'm seeing more and more doctors. There are certain things he's going to do for me. And then there are certain things he's going to say, I need you to go see this doctor who's a specialist. And so I end up going to that doctor, and I go to another doctor, and I go to another doctor. The difference I see with our profession as it becomes a profession is that, as an example with the CrowdStrike issue, and also, by the way, as a fundamental component of artificial intelligence, where we're going with AI, there's going to be a lot of legal wrangling. There already has been, and there's going to be more, and it's going to get worse. And so if I'm an MSP, I'm expecting that my customers are going to ask me, well, who do you know who knows this AI thing and can help me make sure that I avoid any copyright infringement, or et cetera? If I have someone to recommend, that's a good thing, because it keeps the client under my control, and client control is something every MSP wants. So I see a time in which IT professionals will be interfacing with legal professionals, perhaps accounting professionals, and other professionals. I mean, architectural professionals we've been working with for years as we're installing new networks into new buildings. The best time to put the wires in the wall is when the walls aren't there yet.
Right.
So I see that becoming much more and more a part of our lives, where we're no longer talking to the customer just about speeds and feeds, or whose cloud service to engage. We're talking to them about what to be careful of as they're starting this project, and who they should be talking to make sure that they're compliant with whatever regulations they're subject to, et cetera. This excites me personally. I don't know if it excites, I hope it excites your audience the same way, But the idea of being an IT professional has lived inside me for, I don't remember how long. And I don't understand how that hasn't happened yet.
Well, it's interesting because actually, so I'll do it. I'm right there with you. I aspire to our field being that, but I'll observe that there are sections of our field that have achieved that, right? And so I'm going to observe early in my career. I was a consultant that worked for large, Fortune 100, 500, and 1,000 type organizations, and we came in as professionals to work on projects at a high professional level. And I, for those listeners who may not be aware, I live in the Metro DC area, and most of my good friends from school all are senior people at large, consulting style organizations that are partners or project managers or senior people in a field that is treated very differently than what happens in the SMB and lower mid-market. And they command a higher level of pricing. They are measured on business outcomes. They are at the table in a different way than our portion of it, which often has fallen into, which has a predominantly less professional fit. Now, I want to highlight that there are distinctly organizations that run themselves at that high level. And what I would love to hear your take on is that a matter of the size and scale? Is it the organizations? Is it just that there are certain customers that will pay for the higher amount at the SMB level? Like, what do you think the root cause of that kind of stratification in SMB is?
I'll go a step deeper into one of your choices and say that I think it's a function of the success of the messaging of the organizations that provide those services. They have established themselves as credible with a market that will invest in their level of billing. And that's great. It's fantastic. It's something to aspire to. But as you were saying it, the analogy that stuck in my mind was the difference between that primary care physician and a brain surgeon. Clearly, the brain surgeon is a much higher order doctor, but he's still a doctor.
Right.
And the PCP has a place too. I guess the analogy there is the enterprise level provider versus the SMB level provider, mid-market provider. I think that the SMB and mid-market providers absolutely deserve. No, it's not deserve. The customers would benefit. That's really the way to look at it.
Sure.
The customers deserve to have some metric, some flag that says, I'm dealing with somebody who has at least cleared the bar for this profession. In medicine, it's an MD. Here, it's CompTIA A+. No, that's not going to cut it. Right. So it's got to be something else. But the point is that customers right now enter into a relationship with somebody who either is an MSP or somebody who, excuse me for this, is masquerading as an MSP.
Well, I'm 100% with you there.
Listen, I've written about this a million times. There are plenty of former resellers who made the investments, got the education, hired people, developed methodology, did all the things right, and became truly extraordinary IT service providers. Mm-hmm. Then there's another group, and I think a considerably larger group, that went to their business card printer and had MSP stamped on their business cards. And that latter group is making life very difficult for the better group and for the customer. The FBI, the New York Times, CISA, they've all issued warnings. Don't deal with anybody who calls themselves an MSP. That's not fair because there are some great providers, but it's become necessary because there's so many bad ones. I think we need something official, something accredited, something that you can, salute, that differentiates the true professional from the charlatan.
Well,
And
I think it's a fair analysis, and I am 100% with you. And for listeners, I've said the same thing on my show before. If you look at the history of those professions that Howard you just talked about, particularly if we look at doctors and lawyers, because they've been around for a little while, what happened was those industries came together to recognize there was some charlatans. Let's particularly lean on the medical field. They established self-regulation, where the American Medical Association. And then what happened then was states and the federal level said, we shall then leverage this self-accreditation that the organization had put together. And they set their own criteria for the way they're regulated. Now, there is that external check from government and regulators, but most people don't know that doctors figured out their own way to call themselves doctors. It didn't just happen from the outside.
well, I would ask the question, who else would?
Right.
That it makes a lot of sense. And actually, that's really where I think we are with the NSITSP at this point. They've established a professional development group that is establishing those definitions and establishing the set of ethics and establishing, all the procedures that are necessary and how we evaluate somebody to say, yeah, they clear the bar. The next stage will be basically the production of a package to present to federal and state organizations to begin the process of achieving accreditation. It's new, it's early, but it's attracting a lot of great people. And I'm really pleased to see the progress that they're making.
You and me both. Now, I would be remiss then if I didn't bring up an additional force that you've recently covered that I think might be an interesting factor on this. And you introduced the idea of the citizen AI, and it's emerging as a layer of abstraction in app development, allowing non-technical users to leverage both artificial intelligence and machine learning without needing to understand the complexity. And you, in this article where you outline citizen AI, you actually talk about the fact that it may reduce the reliance on traditional information systems teams and change structures as those citizen developers be able to create their own stuff without with minimal coder involvement. And the trick here is that it may also bring in more system experts to manage all the components. Howard, this is interesting because if you think about that dynamic and what you just outlined in terms of the need for professionalization and the ability of end users to be able to do their own stuff, it sounds a lot like shadow IT. And it sounds a lot like shadow IT in a much more impactful way. Should we be worried about these citizen AI development teams pushing out, IT professionals?
Well, I guess, if our friend Mark Templeton were here, he would differentiate between IT and IS.
Fair enough.
And his definitions would be IT are the guys who actually keep the plumbing working, and IS are the guys who actually fashion the applications that run through the plumbing. The Citizen AI article actually grew out of an observation. And in the article, what I basically say is, it hasn't been long since we first started seeing LCNC, low code, no code platforms where you can move tiles around a screen to create your applications, thus enabling anybody who knows their process to create software to support their process. But what I'm predicting is that it won't last long. That whole movement will come and go because we're already seeing something. And I'll harken back to my buddy Jay McBain, who observed that AI will stop being a product unto itself and start being a feature or an element of other products. Here, I see it becoming an element of other products very quickly. Anybody who's got an LCNC platform on the market is already integrating AI into it if they haven't already. And they're rushing to do it. But I think that we'll see the passing of those interfaces where you move the tiles around, and you'll simply be sitting there saying, hey, Copilot, I need such and such an application to do such and such, such and such. Then this one does this one does this, and that one does that. Can you please put that together for me? Thank you very much. Have a nice day. And it's where everybody I see is talking about it going. Some of them already have it. And I can't justify the idea of having any kind of manual interface if I have the ability. I mean, think about Star Trek, right? Computer, blow up that planet. It's the same kind of it's the same kind of thought. We're going to talk to our computers, tell them what we need, and work with them to develop it to be exactly what it needs to be. And then, yeah, I think your traditional coder, um, they may be working on operating systems for a while or more sophisticated things. And I certainly think they're all going to gravitate toward quantum computing where the magic is, because nobody knows the technology. They all consider it magic, which is cool. But the IT people have more and more of not a challenge, but a body of work to do, because it does have some shadow IT characteristics to it. You're inviting users who don't know anything about the infrastructure to be using the infrastructure, and maybe in ways inadvertently that they didn't anticipate. So IT is going to have to become a lot more nimble in keeping tabs on what the applications are actually looking for, what resources they need, and making sure it's possible to provide them in a timely fashion.
Now, it's interesting because you bring up that IT-IS disparity, which I think, by the way, is an important way to think about it. But oftentimes the reason it gets muddled is because when we're talking about smaller organizations, it all get lumps into the technology function, right? We expect, if you're that small doctor's office that you were talking about, you kind of throw that all in together, and I just need a technology person that has to involve all of the components of what an IS person would do and an IT person will do. It's interesting that you bring up the fact that you think AI will do that. We've managed to go pretty far into a conversation about technology without bringing up AI, so we should give ourselves a pat on the back for that. But this is the right. This is the second time in kind of 2 or 3 weeks in this conversation where AI has been disruptive in a conversation in a way that really points to a big change. So the last time I had this conversation was about report building, right? And the idea is we've been struggling for a long time with the idea of report builders. Either they're badly pre-canned reports, or you try and give a user an incredible interface where they can build all their own stuff, and they never use it because it's too complicated with your widgets and boxes and stuff that you drag around. And so AI, and particularly generative AI, will allow you to query a pile of data by just talking to it. Here, you outline, I can now build applications by just talking to it and building it. So what I'm getting at here is should we be thinking about the builders in broadly in all parts of technology being disrupted? Because in that sense, if we think about the builders being disrupted, those that keep the plumbing working almost become more important there. What's your thought to all of that in terms of the builder disruption that's coming here?
Yeah, I think we're going to have conversations like this for a while to come. But I'll remember back to when video conferencing was first introduced, and it was Intel. Intel introduced something called the Team Station. And the Team Station was described by a number of analysts at the time as a solution in search of an application. I think the same thing is true now. And I think it's very real that AI is a solution in search of application.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I'm about to start a new column in Pure AI magazine. And all I want to talk about are practical applications of AI. I'm sorry, I don't see investing in having something that can write my memos for me, or make prettier pictures of me, or whatever. I think that a lot of people are using AI frivolously, and unfortunately, the frivolous uses are getting the promotion. They're getting the visibility. There are a few companies out there that I've seen that have some pretty spectacular applications of AI where, quite frankly, you wouldn't really see what the AI is doing unless you were really intimate with the application. And to me, that's probably how it's going to be. It's not going to make it's going to be invisible. It's going to be transparent. It's just going to work. And so in this new column in Pure AI, I really want to reach out and highlight those applications, because Those are the ones that I think will pave our path to the future
So
with
I'm
AI.
with you. I'm 100% with you, but I want to spur your thinking, man, if you're still in the writing perspective, and I want to give you a thought and see what you think of it as we sort of wrap this. You're exactly right that a lot of this is frivolous, but I think the trick about the frivolous implementations are what they're teaching us. And let me give you the most ridiculous one of my favorite frivolous apps. If you remember back when the iPhone launched, right? And we were all like the App Store created, and we were all figuring out what it could do. And a lot of those initial apps were very, very silly. My two favorites were iFart apps and iBeer apps. And in particular, the iBeer app was the kind of thing where you could put, like, you make your iPhone look like a pint of beer. And if you moved it, the lines all change and the flow would all change. What was interesting was not the end result of it, but it was teaching people about the model and what an accelerometer in a device did for you in terms of space. That you could then recognize that the device understood space, and end users used a frivolous application for it to be something. I think we're in the same bit here, where the frivolity of a lot of what we're seeing is allowing both developers and users to start saying, oh, I think I see some of the pieces that are useful here. And it's the stuff that's coming that will be much more interesting. Give me a reaction to that.
First of all, I'll take your 2007 iBeer and raise you a 1984 Mac Playmate.
Perfect. Yes.
Right? App on
Same
the original
idea.
Mac that showed you, I mean, it showed you things it shouldn't show you, but it showed you how you could point at things, click on them, and things would happen because you clicked on them.
Yep,
and it was very instructive. It was very illustrative. And I agree with you that we need to lead the horses to water. We need to show them what is possible. And that's fine. Being optimistic, I think that it has fired up the imagination of some very, very strong thinkers, people who have wonderful minds, wonderful innovative minds. And they are doing some things that I think will be incredibly beneficial and already are. And I'll be featuring those. I agree with you that people need to see what AI is capable of. I think we need to be careful, though, in that we don't want to give the impression that AI is just a toy. I've seen several analysts comment that it really just seems to be a toy. It may be a passing fancy. It's not.
It's not. I'm with you.
It's a set of algorithms that allows software to do things that are much more subtle than the things it could do in the past. And I think that the thing that I feel the need to do is remind people that you do not have to be afraid of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is able to create relationships between things that simple Boolean algebra never did. And that's great. It's very useful. We've seen some really terrific applications of it. What we all need to be aware of, quite frankly, is what the Terminator movies predicted, which is artificial awareness. When a computer is sentient and understands that it is somebody, it is a thing unto itself, is when it can start to think about, what's threatening me? And that's when the danger just starts to begin. And all these highfalutin professors who are saying, I'm scared, I'm very, very scared, then they should be very, very scared.
Well, Howard, I think you've given me exactly the point to say we're going to wrap this up, because when you write that article, I'll have you back on and we'll talk more about it. Any sense of when that's coming out?
It'll be soon. Be really soon.
Well, then make sure you let me know about it. Howard, this has been great fun. Thanks for joining me for this.
Thank you.
So a preview of what I'm working on that's coming out this weekend. Former FBI operative Eric O'Neill provides a fascinating look into the evolving world of espionage and cybersecurity. O'Neill, who played a pivotal role in capturing the notorious spy Robert Hanssen, joined me to share his expertise on how the landscape of spycraft has dramatically shifted over the past 2 decades. Here's a preview of that interview. as we think about AI getting as part of this, and how do you see cybersecurity sort of evolving over the next, say, 5 years?
Well, just as criminals have become incredibly adept at leveraging AI for everything from deep fakes to impersonation attacks to these brilliant confidence scheme attacks that leverage entire fleets of AI avatars that show up on Zoom calls and completely fool someone until they feel like all of their bosses have just told them to do something, right? Real time in a conversation on a virtual call. Cybersecurity is must and is working along the same lines, using effective AI to fight the bad AI. So, we've been in this cyber war for a very long time, and it's been mostly humans versus humans in this battle over our data. Now it's going to be AI doing a lot of this fighting. AI looking for the malicious AI, the malicious AI doing counter surveillance to try to find the cybersecurity AI. It's really fascinating, but it's gonna happen so much behind the scenes and rely so much on technology. I think it's going to confound us poor humans.
Clearly, that's going to be the conversation that leads going forward. And I'm not alone on that one. David, I see your comment in here exactly the same way, that you found the best use of AI as a personal coach. You input, and the AI is your personal virtual 24/7 coach that you bounce ideas on and allows you to grow your knowledge. I am right there with you. That's one of the use cases that I also use it for. I'm also using it for ideation. When I have an idea, I will put it in there and I will ask questions like, what did I miss? What angles did I not consider? And I think that's the conversation we'll be having ongoing. If you're interested in what Eric O'Neill has to say, my Patreon supporters already have this interview if you want to listen now. It'll drop on the weekend on YouTube and the podcast feed. If you're interested, I really do encourage you to listen. It was a fascinating conversation. You can visit patreon.com/MSP Radio to grab it right now. I want to thank Sales Builder, our Patreon sponsor, whose support makes this show possible. Focus on your IT sales workflow with the power of automation and visit them at salesbuilder.com. That's BUILDR.com. And vendors, you too can get your name mentioned on the live show. It's a simple monthly subscription. Visit patreon.com/MSP Radio to learn more. And listeners, here's what you can do to support the show. The number one thing, like, share, and follow on your favorite platforms. It really makes a huge difference. And if you tell a colleague about what you heard here and how much you enjoy it, it makes a massive difference. And if you want to get access to things early and support directly on Patreon, it's our give what you want model. You set what you think the content is worth, and you get access to all my videos early. If you have a question and are listening to the recording, send it in at question@mspradio.com. Thank you, Kane, for that recognition. I really do appreciate you watching and paying attention. And thanks for joining me for the Business of Tech Lounge. I will see you next time.